Between endless years of hopeless existence and even a single moment of hope, I must choose hope. I must find that signal.
Hello and welcome to GameSpot's Metro Exodus review. My name is Jake and I'm here with Michael. If you haven't noticed, we're doing things a little bit differently. I brought him in here and we're going to discuss his review. Now, you gave Metro Exodus an 8, but before we get into why, can you set up the game? Tell me what Metro Exodus is about.
Sure, it's the third game in the Metro series, which is kind of like a survival horror type of first-person shooter. This one does things a little different with open spaces, and it also got me in a way I did not expect with its story and characters, and we'll get into that later in the discussion. But a reminder is that an 8 out of 10 means great, and I think this is a great game.
And you mentioned the open approach in your review and how it doesn't quite nail some things. I'd say that is one thing you'd say that it doesn't nail, correct?
Yes, so just to give you some context is that Metro Exodus has several chapters, 3 big ones of which are open sandbox.
Hours long, too.
Yes. Whereas the first 2 are kind of traditional open worlds, you can think of them as, where you're free to roam, there's some side quests, and there's a main mission to go down. The thing there is that one part is that I feel like the slow, deliberate movement of Metro was transported to a open space that it wasn't really meant for. So getting around in those worlds is a little difficult and kind of takes away from the experience a little bit. Like in the Volga, where it's in the wintertime, trying to get around the water parts, the rowboats are slow, the sea life that attacks you, it's annoying and kind of makes the pace a little bit more abrupt. Caspian Desert is like pretty barren. There isn't much to do, and there's not too many incentives to venture off into these open areas aside from the side quests that do get marked on your map.
So that kind of leads me into the next thing. Rodrigo on Twitter asked, I know Exodus is more open space, but how well does it conserve that Metro feeling and still innovate for itself? So I think what he means is that sort of claustrophobic, atmospheric, dark feel that you get from Metro.
I think if that's one of your concerns going into Exodus, you shouldn't be worried. 4A still does a great job of instilling that fear, that sense of vulnerability. That really shines through in Exodus, because that was one of my favorite parts of both 2033 and Last Light. Just how scary it was to be in those spaces, but how easily you can just like be killed by something that you're just not ready to handle. Those moments pop up in Exodus. You have a day and night cycle in the open spaces, but you still have missions that funnel you through these terrifying areas with enemies that are intimidating. So you're going to get a lot of that out of Exodus, in addition to some of the more open stuff that they do.
And unlike previous Metro games, because you've left the Metro and because you're exploring Russia itself, you don't really come across vendors, and it relies more on crafting as opposed to currency with the bullets, which was a pretty clever system in the old ones, how you use bullets in order to purchase different equipment, but this relies more on crafting. How do you think that worked?
So I will say that I loved the military-grade bullet currency in the previous games. Instead, now you're doing crafting where you have 2 separate materials, and you have to make your own ammo or scavenge it, and then make your med kits or find those and filters and all that. The crafting, if you're apprehensive about Metro having crafting, again, you shouldn't be worried, because it's a really good system, actually. It's streamlined, and it's also complementary to the sort of the tension that you feel in the game.
Yeah, because you have to make decisions as to what you're going to clean, what you're going to upgrade, what ammo you're going to make.
Yes. There's like a sense of preparation, because you can only make ammo at workbenches, and before you venture off into deeper missions. Except
for your crossbow bolts,
yes,
and your steel balls that you can fire out of your, I forget what the pump gun is called.
The T-car, yeah. Ammo for your primary weapons can only be made at workbenches. So there's a sense of preparation there if you're not constantly scavenging the proper bullets for whatever guns you have. But you can at least get, like you said, steel balls and the arrows for your crossbow. So at least you have something to fall back on in case you do run out of ammo. But what the system does is that, it puts you in control of what you want to create, but it also never forces you to, you always have a sense of that you can you can make a situation work even when you're like almost dead, or if you feel like you're between a rock and a hard place, you have a means of getting out of it. Another thing too is the weapon attachment system, or the modifications. You can also do that through your backpack. You pick them up from enemy weapons, but over time you just kind of build up this arsenal of attachments that you can put on your weapons. And that's another system that plays into the crafting that I like, because you can pull out your backpack and swap out attachments, and it lets you adapt to situations that may arise. So I talk a lot about this example in the taiga missions, which are great. You kind of only have a crossbow, and I took down a few enemies and picked up their guns because I didn't have any at that point in the story. And what I did is I took like a dinky revolver that wouldn't be great for like firefights, and then as soon as I got it, I swapped out a bunch of attachments, and then I had a very good long range weapon, and I was able to hold my own when I was clearing out a bandit camp. And at that moment I realized like, oh, this system is really well done, and it adds a layer of depth to the already good firefights and weapon feel that Metro Last Light at least already had. So in that regard, like, Exodus has incredible gunplay that's really fun to engage with.
So I think the next big thing to touch on after reading your review is that you really like the characters and how they developed those characters and the arcs they had over time. Can you talk a little bit more on that?
Yes, the character progression and the world building for Metro Exodus is my favorite part. Particularly how earnest and genuine everyone feels on this journey, because you're still playing as Artyom, but of course in this trek you bring some friends along the way. And in between the gameplay chapters, I would say, is that you hang out on the Aurora, which is your train, and it acts as like an HQ, like a new home away from home. And here you just you hang out and listen to people talk. These aren't like dialogue trees, or you don't hit a button to engage in a conversation. These are just ambient conversations that happen on there. And I found myself just sitting there and listening to them talk to me about their lives, their stories, their aspirations.
Or even just eavesdropping on other characters.
Yeah, you get a lot out of it because it's so well done. Like, the voice acting can be spotty in parts, but just the stories they tell and the way it's delivered, the way it's acted, and how it kind of feeds into the camaraderie that you end up feeling towards like the end of this game. It's something new for the Metro series, because they've had like philosophical type of stories with like the Dark Ones and all that, but here it does away with that and more focuses on the relationships. I say this in my reviews that like these are characters that you want to follow to the ends of the earth, which is kind of essentially what you're doing in this game. Yeah. And that's because like they're so endearing, they're so earnest. And for example, Stepan, who's this big burly dude who can play guitar, has like
OT.
Yeah, he has like a heart of gold. And Demir, who's trying to make sense of his ethnicity and culture, and then finds it eventually, is such an empowering, like, smaller story in the bigger picture, but it's there and it happens. And when I saw it, I was like, this does a lot for the game. And then Anna, who's your wife, who just opens up to you in such genuine ways aboard the train. And then Miller, who's the leader, who's a hard ass, but still has that tough love vibe.
I don't care if you kill yourself over this silly dream of yours, but don't you see what you're doing to my daughter, your wife?
And it's just this band of characters that you want to fight for. I realized this after I finished the game, is that, wow, there wasn't really any central villain. There wasn't like this big bad person to take down. Instead, you're just fighting to survive. And with that in mind, it's kind of like the thing that drives you is how much you care about this cast. And, Metro Exodus does an incredible job of, making you care about this. So by the time it wraps up, you're like, dude, that's my squad. Like, I'll fight for these people to the ends of the earth. And it's new for the series, I think. And it's just, I can't stop thinking about how much that affected me and how much that did for the overall experience once I finished it. Like, I'm going to remember this squad and the journey we went on for as long as I can.
So that actually brings up another point. Alec Buzel on Twitter also asked, as someone who has not played the other Metro games, would it make sense to jump into Exodus, even with all of this character development? would you feel lost at all if you started with Exodus?
If you want to jump into Exodus, by all means do it, even if you haven't played the previous games, because by virtue of them doing something completely new with the setting and its characters, some carry over from Last Light, but they do such new things with them that it kind of doesn't matter. They can stand on their own in Exodus alone. So it's you shouldn't worry about whether or not you've played 23-3 and Last Light, but I'd say if you can, play those games because they're still very good.
Yeah, and they're both on current gen consoles, PC as well.
Yep.
And then another question is not super exciting, but something that people are definitely curious about is how did the game run, and did you run into a lot of technical issues? I myself ran into a couple pretty bad bugs, but it didn't hinder me too much. Like, I was still able to finish the game.
Yeah, those things will pop up, and they're kind of frustrating, to be honest. This is pre-day one patch, so this may change with the final release. But I fell through geometry right after a quick save, or after a checkpoint, so then I have to kept.
It's pretty funny.
I kept loading, and I just kept falling through the geometry. But I had a quick save from 5 minutes ago. Lost some progress, but whatever. It's fine. I'll live. And then I lost also equipment. I went to the workbench, and all of a sudden, a lot of things weren't there, that was kind of frustrating too, because I had decked myself out in a way I wanted to, and then I couldn't anymore. Hopefully that gets fixed, but that was also frustrating. But frame drops too, they happen. Depending on your system, some people, of course, this always happens. Some people say they have perfectly fine performance, which is cool, but I ran into some frame drops. I know you also ran into a lot of frame drops, and you have a pretty high-end PC as well. So if you do experience that, don't be surprised.
So that kind of leads into the next question as well, which is also a question from Twitter from Steven Davidson. And he asked, were there any noticeable differences between the PS4 and PC versions? I know you played both. You played PC and you played a little bit on the PS4. We actually didn't get Xbox codes, so we don't know how it runs on there. But having played PC, which is obviously going to be the highest end, and then PS4, which is probably on the lower end, how did that run for you?
It's pretty distinct. I mean, with a decent PC, I can run native resolution 1080p or 1440p and get 60 frames per second, which matters a lot to me. Mm-hmm. And then so, with that in mind, I think there's a big distinction between the PC versions and the console versions. But if you can only play this game on consoles, the PS4 version, at least in my experience, ran pretty stable, albeit at a lower frame rate of 30 maybe sometimes sub 30 frames per second. But I mean, it was playable, and it's not too surprising considering what console versions of PC games are. It's kind of comes with the territory. But if you can play on PC, that's definitely where you want to be. But if not, don't worry, console versions are perfectly fine, at least in my experience.
And then stepping away from the review itself and more into the broader conversation, an interesting thing about this game is that they pulled it from the Steam store a couple weeks before it was supposed to launch. And I know this has caused a lot of backlash from fans.
Yeah.
I guess, what are your thoughts on that in general?
It's, if Valve is salty about it, I understand, because it was pulled about 2 or 3 weeks before launch. At least people who pre-ordered it are still playing it on Steam. It is going to come out in 2020 on Steam, but it's on the Epic Store. It's not being taken away from PC as a whole, so it's not that big of a deal to me. I don't see a problem with it. And also, it's $50 on the Epic Store as opposed to the standard $60. Now, I don't know if this is the case, but I imagine that the fact that developers and publishers get a higher cut of their sales can kind of incentivize to them to sell it at $50. So that's kind of a win for people who play games.
Yeah,
but
for
also
people who play and develop games.
Yeah, so I don't know what the problem is. I think people are just trying to stir the pot or whatever. But again, I do understand if Valve is a little salty about it.
Before we close out, do you have any last words, closing remarks that you would like to talk about?
Yeah. I think that I want to mention the morality system at least real quick, because that returns from the previous games. And I think that I got a good ending. I'm not going to go into what happened, but I think I got a good ending. And if looking back on my review, I feel like the tone and the hopefulness and optimism that comes out of that kind of fed into my final perception of the game. And I know you and Mike Mahardy got very different endings from me. And it's just wild to think about how much the morality system and how much I paid attention to it, and how that fed into the events that unfolded kind of affected my overall impression of the game and its story and characters. And also, one more thing, the Taiga chapter, I know that's the third kind of open sandbox. Great level. One of the best levels in all of Metro. It's probably the highest point gameplay-wise for this game.
Yeah, because it definitely blends in those open areas with the more linear sections as well, and it does it very well.
Yeah, that level is a masterpiece.
Anyway, that is Michael's and GameSpot's review of Metro Exodus. Let us know what you think of this new review style. We're kind of trying things out, and make sure to stay tuned to GameSpot because there are a shit ton of reviews coming down the line.
There's only Metro, nothing else. And the Order is here to defend it. Because if not us, then who?